Good evening, everyone. I am Lisa Morgan, a kindergarten teacher and president of the Georgia Association of Educators.
And I'm Sharon Doe, the Vice President of the Georgia Association of Educators, and I'm a physics teacher in Augusta, Georgia.
And I'm Carly Shaw, the Secretary Treasurer of the Georgia Association of Educators, and I teach physical science in Fulton County.
And our special guest this evening is Dr. Michelle Ah, the newly elected state senator, and she is also an anesthesiologist. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Ah.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate having so many science teachers here. I like that.
I always feel surrounded. And we also have with us our GAE lobbyist, Joe Fleming. So this evening, we asked Dr. Ah to be here and talk with us a little bit about COVID and the vaccine and where we're going with that. And so Dr. Ah, the first question I want to ask you is something that has been asked by many of our members with this concern that educators are being told that transmission is not happening in the schools, that it's all happening outside the schools and we're perfectly safe in the school. But they're saying they're doing contact tracing, but we really don't see that happening. How can we really know that the transmission is not happening in our schools?
So thank you so much. That's a great question. And that's one I get asked very often, particularly from teachers. So first of all, just before I start, I want to really thank GAE for all their support during my campaign. I'm here because of you. And now that I'm here to work for you and to do the work that you sent me here to do. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So let's talk about COVID in schools. So COVID spread, generally speaking, not even just in schools, but just in the community. COVID spreads whenever there's a weakness in the system, right? So in places where people are unmasked, in places where people are crowding together, closely together, in places where people are not abiding by CDC guidelines, that's where COVID gets a chance to find new hosts, right? So when I'm not in legislative session, I work at a hospital. And the hospital is an environment where you'd think it'd be very easy to get COVID, right? Because similar to a school, we're very close to other people. There's a lot of other people there. In the hospital, we have patients that aren't wearing masks for whatever reason. Maybe they're having surgery on their face, we're intubating them, whatever the reason. So similar to schools, sometimes people are masked or unmasked. And sometimes at the hospital, we're literally taking care of COVID patients, right? However, one thing I'll put forth is that the rate of spread in the hospital is actually not that much different than the spread in the general community. And the reason is because at the hospital, we maintain very, very stringent precautions. For example, in the hospital, we wear our masks always, 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 always. The only time we ever take our mask down at all is to eat or drink. And I remember back in the beginning of COVID, they even said, like, before you get to school, try to drink like a liter of water so you don't have to drink as much, like they're really vigilant about that. We have limits on how many people can spend time in our lounge, like at meal times. There's rules about how many people can sit per table just to make sure people are spaced out. And sometimes people, if it looks like there's maybe too many people in the lounge, people just take their meals out to the hallway or just to other areas just to be able to spread out more, because those are the times that your mask could be down. The other thing about the hospital, and I'm just going to draw this analogy to the schools in a bit, is we test every patient who's admitted to the hospital for COVID. And at the hospital, we obviously practice very scrupulous infection control even before we did this, right? Like we're crazy about sanitizing, washing our hands, all that kind of stuff. We wear eye protection. Our ventilation is very good in the hospital. So just from that point of view, I'd say that COVID risk has less to do with being at work, period, than it has to do with the working conditions, right? So that said, I think if you're able to maintain good working conditions at a school, and we're going to talk more about this because I actually want to hear from you guys what it's really like, because you guys would know. And from what I've seen, my kids go to Fulton County schools. I actually have one kid each in high school, middle school, and elementary school. So I get a really good sampling of what it's like, at least in my area. From what I've heard and what I've seen, it seems reasonable that they've been able to minimize spread. Going into the holiday season and even right before the holidays, we did see the cases start to tick up. So obviously it's not foolproof. However, without really good, rigorous contact tracing, and I want to hear more about that from you all too, because I'm curious. I've heard different stories from different people. in different school districts. I think it's a stretch to say exactly where any patient contracted COVID, right?
Yeah.
I think it's difficult to say for sure you got it here or for sure you got it there. I think that many people who contract COVID in the community, particularly over the holidays, which is what we're seeing now. I think we're at that peak now because we're a little more than 2 weeks out from New Year's, which is when the holidays kind of ended. For those people, they did contract it in like friend or family groups because of the nature of the activities, right? Like it's the holidays, it's Christmas, you take off your mask to sip your eggnog, you hug your dad, you sit at a table to play cards with your friends, you know, all these normal loving things that we miss. I think that's why people tend to point to community activity in indicating that spread is more so in the community because that's when our guards are down. However, I think it's difficult to say with any certainty, for sure you got the spread here, or for sure you got the spread there. All you can do is make sure you're as rigorous with your infection control as possible, which I'd like to hear more from you, how it's going in the schools.
Okay, so, and I'm going to point out, because this is something that we at GAE have been saying over and over and over. We must have mask mandates, and we know all our schools in Georgia are not requiring masks. We've got everything from expected to suggested to, well, maybe you can. And I guess that's not the way to describe it, but that's kind of how it's happening in the actual classrooms. So we definitely need the mask mandates. We need the smaller classes, and we need everybody separated. And if we could add the testing, I think that's the key I heard that we don't have in our schools yet. Are we close to being able to do that, to having some kind of test that would be a very rapid test that we could be tested as we came into our schools in the morning?
The ideal thing obviously would be that we would have a test that is quick, accurate, and non-invasive, especially for kids, that you could test every morning, let's say before you leave the house, right? Spit into a cup or whatever, get your test, and if it's negative, you go to school. If it's positive, you don't go to school. That would be the ideal. We had heard about some saliva testing earlier in the pandemic. I haven't heard where it is in the process yet, but I do know that there is saliva testing that we're doing at the Capitol now, right? Okay. At the Capitol, what we're doing is that all legislators and staff are being tested twice a week, which it's not as good as every day, but it's still much better than what we were getting like at the hospital. I never got tested, you know, so it's kind of like, this is amazing. Twice a week. The turnaround time is a little bit long because it's a PCR test that takes longer. So we get tested Mondays and Thursdays, and it takes about 24 hours for that test to come back. So the fact of how long that return is not foolproof. For example, the first day of our legislative session, we all came in, we got our test Monday morning, spent the whole day there. And then in the evening or the next day, we found out that I think 1 or 2 of our members had tested positive, but they'd been there the whole day and they felt fine, you know, so they didn't know. So that lets some, you know, degree of detection escape. However, at least they didn't come in the next day, right? And at least then they were able to contact trace around them. Ideally, a home test is what we'd be looking for. A lot of the things that we've been waiting for, I think as we got closer to the end of, you know, this previous administration, we gave up a little bit. We're just like, all right, you know, they're not going to do anything. This is not going to happen. So wait for the next administration to come in, who have seemed very keen and intent on the science to ramp up what they need to do. I think their focus right now in the immediate sense is to A, mobilize our vaccine, and B, get the numbers under control. And I think once we're at a good place, I think they will look at like, how do we get back to normal and start to ramp up our supplies for these sort of testing kits and rushing through the testing, you know, FDA approval for those home test kits. But I think sort of first things first. It may not come that soon, maybe by the next school year, but I think it's hard to say.
Okay. Sharon?
Senator, we've run into comments from a number of legislators that say kids don't get it, they don't transmit it as frequently as adults do, that therefore it's safe to go back to school in person. What would be your response to that?
I think that of the traditional strains that we'd seen, many studies had shown that younger children in particular, and I'm talking younger children like, you know, age like 10 and younger, did tend to, by the studies that I've read, transmit at a lower rate. We're not exactly sure why, but that's what had been shown. But of course, once you get into like the middle school years and the high school years, certainly that it's basically equivalent to adult behavior. And I've had many people asking me, because they work in special environments or they work with special needs students, like they won't keep their masks on. These kids are, all over me. Is this safe? And, obviously the ideal thing would be that both people are wearing their masks, but the good thing is that if the teacher themselves has access to good PPE, then that is a good protection too. And I say that as someone who works in a hospital with patients. Some of them have COVID and they can't have masks on because of the type of surgery they're having or what kind of work we're doing. But we are wearing our PPE, and that seems to protect us pretty well, even though it's just one-sided. I said in terms of the traditional variants, right? So, under the full PPE conditions using all our CDC guidelines, I feel pretty okay about kids going to school and spreading it amongst each other. And I say that as someone, just for full disclosure, like I weigh this very heavily, but I've chosen in this moment to send my kids to face-to-face school, but I'm looking at the numbers and I continually reevaluate this, because we don't know yet. This is a new disease. The one thing I will bring up, and something you probably want to talk about, is there are some new variants out there that some of the studies in other countries have shown are maybe more infectious among even younger kids. So that's something we're going to have to watch closely and see how this guides our thinking moving forward. And if you want to talk a little bit about those variants, we definitely can, because I get questions about that also.
Yes, I want to ask you about the strain that they said is reported to be more contagious than the first strain that we saw. What does that mean for schools? How would that impact our school day?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot. I'm going to just take a step back so we can talk about the variants overall. And you guys, many of you are science teachers, so you probably understand a lot of this already, but I just want to talk about it generally, because sometimes people hear these words like mutation and variant, and it sounds very scary. So just to explain, so obviously the important thing to understand is that all viruses mutate over time, right? Viruses reproduce at an incredible exponential rate, like that's why we call it going viral, right? It's grow and spread. So anytime you make photocopies of something and then make a photocopy of that and then make a photocopy of that times 1 billion times, you're going to have little changes that build up over time, right? And most of these changes are inconsequential, right? Again, think of the Xerox analogy. Maybe there was a little blip of lint on one of the copies and you copy that a few times, but it doesn't like make it that you can't read. It doesn't change the meaning of the document. Or if you run out of toner, you can still read it. It's just different. But sometimes these changes that accrue over time matter, right? Maybe a typo got carried over and it changes the meaning of a sentence. That's not that's different, right? So with COVID and with other viruses, we worry about the types of mutations that could make the virus more contagious, like what we're talking about now. Mutations that might make the virus more severe, that would be worrisome. Or mutations that could make the problem more difficult to treat or immunize against, right? These are the types of things that people are looking at very closely. So there are likely many variants of this coronavirus out there, not just this one we're talking about, the B117 variant, which was first discovered in the UK. However, there are a few that we're keeping a closer eye on because it seems like those variants may have accrued changes that do confer some sort of functional significance. So let's talk about the B117 variant, the one that's out of the UK, the one that is more infectious that we've been talking about. So some studies out of the UK shows that the B117 transmits more easily from person to person. They think maybe it's because the virus, the people with B117 have a higher level of virus concentration in their upper respiratory tract. And maybe that's why it's easier to spread, that each breath, shoots out more. And maybe that's why it's easier for kids to spread it. Some studies show it's maybe 50% more transmissible, which is significant. So 2 important points about this. One is that there's no indication that this variant causes more severe disease, right? And 2, there's no indication that the vaccines we have at present are going to be ineffective in protecting against B117. The vaccines should still work. However, the fact that it's more contagious is concerning because even if each individual, even if the percent of people with severe disease isn't more, you're still going to have more people overall with severe disease if you have more patients. What I would say about school spread is, this is not a satisfying answer, but we don't know yet. We don't know what the right answer is. The thing that we do know is that the standard methods that we've been recommending all along to mitigate disease spread still work against these new variants. So I think maybe instead, what I would think, and that's what I've been thinking about my own kids, because I don't want my kids to get sick either. I don't want my kids' teachers to get sick. So I really think about this in real world terms. I have a lot of skin in the game here. I think what we need to concentrate on is for schools and governing bodies and governments to start really doubling down on our mitigation techniques. For example, actually having a mask mandate as opposed to this sort of like here and there, maybe some people mask, some people don't. We know that works, right? Even while we're waiting for the vaccine, we know this thing we have works well. So if we double up on that, that's going to cut down on the spread more so than pulling everyone out of school. You know, I think that's a reasonable response to this, is to double down on the techniques we have to be able to keep people safe, but not shut down our entire society. Of course, this, you know, every day we're learning more about these new variants and about how it's spreading and like that. This may change, right? But I think that is a reasonable approach now. And I think that is the approach that at present, sort of the CDC and other public health experts have been looking at, is to really just push the measures that we know work.
Follow-up question to that.
Oh.
You mentioned that we have little information on the variants and the severity that these the new variants has caused. Would you recommend face-to-face instruction? Would that be high on your list?
Recommended in terms of people going back to school in person?
Yes, face-to-face
Yeah.
in the building. Would you recommend that?
Yeah. Well, you know, like I said, my kids are in face-to-face school now, right? So obviously that gives some indication of it. It's not an easy decision, right? Because I don't know if that's the right answer, and I kind of want to see what happens, because this is their second day back after Christmas. I do see that the local case numbers have sort of plateaued a little bit, and I think, like I said, it's because we're about 2 weeks out from New Year's. And usually it takes about 2 weeks for us to see the effects of it. So I think we're starting to get past it, but now the kids are back in school. I don't know if the cases are going to go back up again. At present, I'm leaning towards, you know, 4 schools with good mitigation technique in place. I can only speak from, I'm comfortable with kids going in face-to-face school. I can't say that that's not going to change, right? Like it's hard to give definitive answers on this when it's a constantly changing environment. All I can tell you is what I'm thinking right now, based on what I see. And it could be that, you know, they came back to school on Tuesday, that 2 weeks from now we see another spike, and it might be like, all right, well, that didn't work. That was not the right approach, right? We have to be, as scientists, you understand, right? Like we're constantly questioning our assumptions. That's the nature of science, is you don't take anything for granted. Nothing is for sure, right? Everything you assume, you're going to question that assumption, and you're going to prove a new truth or a new reality, you know? So that's what I'm working with now. I know that's not a satisfying answer, right? But you know, at least I'm standing behind it for now, because I've invested my most valuable resource into the school system, and we'll see how it goes. And I will definitely keep you guys updated. And if I'm pulling my kids out, I will let you know too.
Well, I do agree with you that it's a hard decision to make. I made the decision to keep my children home. And right now, there's been a spike in Richmond County. It's been going up, up, up. And with that, our schools are currently all virtual, at least until the end of the month. And then, according to the superintendent, he's going to listen to the health professionals as to whether or not he's going to assign face-to-face instruction, you know, when we're going to go back, or if we'll go back at all. But I do like the fact that he's leaving it up to the data and making decisions based on the data and the advice of healthcare professionals.
Yeah, and it's very difficult, because we all heard the argument on the other side too, right? Because there are health costs to having children go virtual, especially younger kids. I mean, like I said, I have a high school, middle school, and elementary school kids, and being virtual has affected all of them differently. I've given them all the choice of whether they want to return virtual. I mean, it's not all up to them, they're kids, right? But, you know, like obviously we have the final say, but I do want to hear from them what they want. And they have elected to go back face-to-face, which you weigh that part too, right? Because of the cost to their education. But it's not an easy decision. And I don't think anyone feels totally confident that there's a totally right answer, right? We're all learning as we go. So this is also partially why I'm here, is I want to hear from you all how it's been for you, because also every school district is different and every county has been handling it in a different way. Like I said, I'm in North Fulton. We've been doing it a certain way, but I've heard from, you know, a lot of other districts that are taking very different paths.
I have a question about the vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
I know they're hopefully getting ready to, they've already rolled it out to people that are 65 and older, and they're getting ready to roll it out to some more, hopefully the teachers next. I've heard there are about 6 different strands of COVID, and I could be off on that number. I'm wondering how effective the vaccine will be. Is it like the flu vaccine where there's several strands and they pick one and they hope that that's the one that's going to take off and you'll be protected against it? Can I still get COVID if I have the vaccine?
That is a great question. So I'm going to explain a little bit about that vaccine, and you're going to love this. All right, science teachers, get into it. I'm going to explain how this vaccine works, and then I'm going to give you the actual answer to your question. So the vaccines we have at present, right now, the 2 that are available are the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine. You guys have probably heard that. This is a new type of vaccine. They're called mRNA vaccines. And how they work is that they have a piece of mRNA that transcribes the information for the body to make a piece of the spike protein, which is on the outside of the COVID virus. So this is like the protein that the virus uses to enter the cell. So it's very like a recognizable like fingerprint essentially of this virus. So the mRNA vaccine, it delivers this information, goes to the ribosome, which is sort of like the 3D printer inside the cell. The ribosome cranks out a copy of the spike protein, and then the body builds immunity to the spike protein, just like if you got a native COVID infection, and it fights it off the next time it sees the spike protein in real life, right?
I love the illustration.
Sorry, say that again?
I love that illustration.
I figured it's more helpful to see it than me saying it, because people are like, what? Spike protein? What? I don't understand. Anyway, so the spike protein is what's recognized, right? And they've made the mRNA code several different like epitopes of this spike protein. So it can recognize in a lot of different ways.
Okay.
So obviously, if the mutation of the COVID virus with these new variants, that the spike protein itself changes enough, then is it possible that the vaccine that we've been given for the traditional one wouldn't recognize these new spike proteins? Yes, it is possible. However, of the variants that have come out, particularly the B117, it's seen that the vaccine is thought to still be efficacious against that new variant, that the spike protein has not mutated enough. I will say that there are 2 other variants in Brazil and in South Africa, I believe, that have accrued some changes that are more worrisome for maybe being able to evade some of these antibodies to some degree. However, I would say this. One is that the vaccines that we have are studied, on the traditional strain to be 95% effective, more or less, right? So even if these new strains come over and it's only like 85% effective, that's still really good. So people should still very confidently get this vaccine because it is going to protect. Second thing is that those strains, the Brazil strain and the South Africa strain, they're not here yet. They have not been detected in the United States. There are some travel restrictions now. So hopefully we can keep them out. And the goal right now, because we know that these variants exist, we know they're spreading, is to really try to vaccinate as many people as quickly as possible to make that ring of immunity to shut down the virus so that it doesn't keep xeroxing itself, changing, because that's when we start to get into trouble, I think. So that is my very long answer with diagrams about.
No, that was awesome.
And that's sort of like, so is it possible that we might need to get new COVID vaccines like every year, every 2? It's possible, like we get new flu vaccines every year too for some of these reasons, so that it's possible. I can't say for sure, but hopefully we'll get at least a couple of years out of this one. And then if we need to make a new one, now that they know how to do this technology, if they find new strains that escape what we have, now it's easy for them to make this little part, right? Because now they have the technology. All they have to do is change this little information piece. That should be an easy fix. So if we need to make a new one, it's not like starting from scratch.
Okay. Do you know when we'll be able to get the vaccine? Like what the status of for us and for our students to get that?
So this is a good question. So teachers, as you probably know, are in phase 1B, right? With other essential workers. Currently, we are at phase 1A plus. 1A not plus was healthcare workers and nursing home residents. So that was when we started. They increased to 1A plus, not this past Monday, but last Monday. So what, like 10 days ago? That's a big expansion, right? Because once you include people who are 65 and over, that's like more than 1 million people that they just sort of dumped in this pool of people who are qualified for the vaccine. This is complicated by the fact that Georgia actually does not have enough vaccine to cover everyone that they said is eligible for 1A plus. So they created a little bit of like a run on the bank, essentially, right? Because they were like, it's open for everyone. And everyone's trying to call at the same time to get the vaccine, and there's just not enough at this moment. Right now, and everything is going to change, so I'm telling you this information that's going to be wrong by tomorrow. But as of the last time we checked these numbers, Georgia was getting about 120,000 doses a week, of which 40,000 were being sort of set aside for healthcare workers and nursing home residents, right? So two things are going to change with that. One is if at some point, and Governor Kemp thinks maybe by the end of the month, we'll finish vaccinating most of our long-term care facility members. And at some point, we're going to finish vaccinating a lot of our healthcare workers. So that's going to be a pool that's going to come back to the general public that we can share with everyone, right? The second thing is I expect that with the Biden administration coming in and really ramping up vaccine distribution and manufacture, that we'll get more vaccines, period, right? So that's going to help. It's going to take a little bit of time because he like just got the keys, right? And it takes time to, you know, when you haven't been working on it, when an administration hasn't been doing the work, and then you have to come in and kind of like get everything going. I don't want people to think it's going to happen by tomorrow, but at some point we'll start to see this more vaccine. And the third thing I want to tell you that's going to increase these doses that we can distribute to everyone is that there are 2 other vaccines that are set to hopefully come into the market within maybe hopefully the next month or so. One's from Johnson & Johnson and one is from AstraZeneca, right? So once these 2 more vaccines come, then we'll have 4 versions that are available. They're a little bit different, but you know, let's get everyone vaccinated. Then we'll have even more. So the way that we move through these tiers is going to be almost purely dictated by how many doses we have in the state. And secondarily, the second bottleneck is how fast can we get them out? Because we've been having trouble mobilizing our vaccines, right? So even if we've not been getting enough, we still aren't moving what we have as little as it is. So that's going to require more support and staffing from the public health point of view, which is also something that we are working on, right? Because when you underfund a department, you can't expect it to suddenly do everything for you. That's what happens when you don't invest in things. But those are the things we're looking at. So I can't say, I wish I could tell you for sure, we're going to get to 1B by February 18th, like, or something like that. That's not information I have now because we have no sense of how many vaccine doses we're going to get per week, but it's going to be more than what we've been getting. So I know also that's not a satisfying answer, but hopefully sooner than before.
And we at GAE were invited to some meetings next week when we're going to be learning more about the vaccine and it coming to educators. One of our people that's watching this afternoon asked about our students being vaccinated.
Oh, yeah, great question.
When that might begin to happen.
Yeah. So at present, the 2 vaccines that we have, the Moderna and Pfizer, haven't really been studied in kids, especially younger kids. I always mix up which one it is, but I think it's Moderna was studied up to 16 and over, and Pfizer was studied for 18 and over. I might have mixed up those 2, but one of them goes down to 16, but that's the youngest. I think they are doing studies in younger kids now, but it only goes down to 12 is what the studies are right now, right? And that's going to take some time to get enough subjects and give it to the kids and see if it works, all this kind of stuff. So, you know, if it's not going to be in time for this school year. I can say that probably with some confidence. Will it be in time for the next school year by the fall? I hope so. It really depends on how many study subjects they can recruit. And it depends somewhat on our case numbers in the community. Ironically, the fact that the case numbers are high actually makes the studies go faster, right? Because the point is you give the vaccine and then you're like, go kids, be in the world, and then see if anyone gets COVID. So when the numbers in the community are higher, it gives you more chance to catch COVID. So that's bad, but it's also good for the study. But yeah, I have not seen that much in terms of studies that were studying kids who are younger than 12, which is what a lot of us are thinking about, because I have an 8-year-old, right? Like I want to know when she's going to get it. And it feels terrible, I think, for a lot of parents and a lot of people who take care of kids like you all, to qualify for the vaccine, as we all will, certainly before our kids, and for us to be protected and watch our kids run around knowing that they could get it too. So it's a good question. I'm hoping by the next school year, but I can't say for sure.
Okay. And so that kind of answers one of the other questions. We've got several questions. If the COVID vaccine would be added as a required immunization, and that decision is probably even further down the road once it's available.
Right.
The other question, if all educators do not want to be vaccinated, does that mean we're going to continue quarantining if we're testing positive or exposed going forward?
Meaning if that individual educator who did not want to be vaccinated, I think that's probably reasonable. You know, like, I don't think we're at that point yet, right? But I think
Right.
that is reasonable that if you are not immunized, that you know, same if you get the measles, like what if you didn't get the MMR vaccine and you got the measles? Yeah, you should stay home, because even if I'm vaccinated, vaccination is not 100% thing, right? Like, I could still get COVID. It's only 95% effective, right? And the only way you make it more and more effective is to vaccinate more people. So the more people that don't get vaccinated, the more it endangers people, even if they are vaccinated, right? And we saw that with measles outbreaks a couple of years ago. Same principle. And, you know, and that's why they talk about herd immunity. Like, how many people do you really need to vaccinate to make sure that there's this like ring of protection? So I would think that if people are not vaccinated and they can track COVID, then, or are near a COVID patient, then yes, they should continue to practice all those same quarantine and isolation guidelines that we're practicing now.
All right.
How confident do you feel about this vaccine since it was come about so fast? I mean, it's pretty quick as vaccines go. How confident are you in this vaccine? So,
I'm very confident in this vaccine, and I will tell you, I have gotten both doses myself. Just so you know, again, I have some skin in the game, and I was so happy to get it. I was so excited that it finally came about. So I'm going to tell you two things that are going to make people hopefully feel a little bit better about this vaccine. So I did mention, obviously it's a new vaccine. We haven't had it before because we haven't had COVID before, right? And that they're mRNA vaccines, which is a new type of vaccine, right? That we haven't seen this before, this situation where we encode the protein that makes the, you know. However, mRNA vaccines, the concept of them have been studied for many, many years, even decades, for other viruses, right? We just didn't have those vaccines yet because there's not that urgency, but they've been studied for seasonal flu. They've been studied for Zika virus. Remember Zika, when we were all like, Zika virus? And everyone was like freaking out about that, the olden days when we freaked out about little things. And rabies. We've been studying mRNA vaccines for rabies. So part of the reason that we were able to roll out this vaccine so quickly, and what felt very quickly, is because so much of the work had already been done. Like, we knew how to do this. We just had to get the information of like, how do we make that little piece to deliver? And luckily, scientists around the world were working on it and shared the information. They're like, here's the code for this protein. So that's why, you know, we had this information in, I think, January or February, right? So all the time since like a year ago has just been spent doing the study and giving it to people to make sure it's safe, right? Each of the two vaccines that came out so far, the Pfizer and Moderna, have been studied in about 30,000 people each. So that's a lot of people. You know, people always say like, I don't want to be the first one to get it. I don't want to be a guinea pig. Da, da, da. You're not, because the guinea pigs already got it. Like, that's what the study was. 30,000 people, each one got it. So this has been very rigorously studied. The other thing that makes it, that it came out so quickly, is I think that there's probably, actually, certainly has never been a virus in the history of mankind that has had so many people working on it at the same time, right? And the proof of that is that we have 2 vaccines out already in a year, right? Which is amazing. And we have 2 more that are coming out in probably a couple of weeks. 4 vaccines, because so many people are like, this is the problem of, you know, the earth now. Everyone's focused on it. So you think about like a mansion after a party. If 2 people are cleaning that mansion, it's going to take you like a week to clean it up. You get 100 people on the job, they're going to clean it up in 2 hours, you know? So it's that kind of thing. So it's not that it was rushed, right? Because every check that you would do in a standard vaccine study was done. They have all the patients, they checked every single box, they did every single, you know, FDA necessary piece. It's just, there was a lot of people working on the problem. I hope that makes people feel better, because I do hear that a lot, that the speed of how fast it came out makes people worried, like, is this okay? Like, is this good? You know, like, you're the first one to drive on a new bridge they just built, and you're like, has this been tested? Like, am I gonna die? You know, but I've gotten it myself, and I'm happy to talk with anyone about my vaccine experience. It was fine. It was not worse than the flu vaccine for me.
I'm glad you cleared that up. Now, which one did you get? Did you get the Pfizer one or the Moderna one?
I got the Pfizer one because since I was a healthcare worker, I was in like the earlier part of it, and that's all we had in the state, because Pfizer came out first, remember, like a couple of weeks before, and then we started getting Moderna. I have given the Moderna vaccine in the vaccine clinic. I say they're both because people ask me like, which one should I choose, Pfizer or Moderna? I usually always say, I'm like, don't choose. They're just take, if someone's offering you one, just take it. But I'll tell you like a few of the marginal differences between the two. And most of the differences really shouldn't matter to a patient because you don't have to deal with this, is that the storage requirements for the Moderna are much easier. They don't need that like ultra cold fridge. Moderna just can use like a regular fridge. And something that's applicable, I think, for a school situation is that the way it's delivered, Moderna comes in 10 doses per vial, but you don't have to order it in like a huge, super big box. Pfizer, you have to order in lots of 975 each, which is a lot, right? So you really got to be vaccinating like a ton of people to order that huge box. Whereas Moderna, I think you can order in like lots of like, much less, like 100 or something like that, or maybe like a couple hundred, which is more like a school size. So I would think that for situations where you don't have to be at the hospital where they have this like crazy ultra cold fridge, or you're going out to the community or delivering to a school system, that the Moderna would be a good place to, you know, a good option, because it's easier to store, it's easier to transport. You don't have to have a billion of them, you know, and it's easier to give, honestly, like as someone who gave the vaccine, I'm like, oh, this is way easier than Pfizer. The efficacy is the same. The side effects are basically the same. Everything is the same otherwise.
That leads me to my next question. How are they different? How is one able to be stored at a regular temperature and one has to be stored at a really, really cold temperature?
I'm not exactly sure why the manufacturing has made them so different, but I assume it has to do with whatever the lipid particles are that wrap up the mRNA, because you can't just like put mRNA in someone, you have to like put it in a little like fat glob. So I assume it's something with how they've decided to package their mRNA, and each one chose, you know, a different vector to do it. And I think that's why, but I don't want to say for sure because I don't want to pretend I know exactly why if I don't.
So what do you foresee in the future for this vaccine? You know how they would give flu shots at the schools? Do you see in the future schools administering the COVID vaccine?
I think it's possible. I think one other thing about the COVID vaccine that's a little bit different from the flu shot is that at present, and it may be just because it's a new vaccine, so we're being a little bit extra careful, is that we have this observation period after people receive the vaccine of about 15 minutes for most patients, or if you have a history of a severe allergic reaction, we watch you for 30 minutes. So that just makes it a little bit more complicated to give, because not only do you have to give the vaccine, but then you have to have a place for people to sit for 15 minutes so that we can just like, you know, watch them scroll on their phone for 15 minutes and then be like, okay, you're good, go home. That makes it a little more complicated also because you have to have enough space, right? Because you don't want to have people packed into a waiting room. Because usually we do the vaccine and we're like, okay, go to the observation room. And it's a pretty big room where people can spread out so they don't, you know, same rules apply, even if you just got a vaccine, physical distancing and all that. So for a school, you'd have to think through like, do we have space to put students? Like if you immunize them, would you just put them in the auditorium or something and just have them wait the 15 minutes? You also might want staff to be observing them, because if there's a school nurse or someone who's giving the vaccine and she's taking care of these patients, you need another clinician to be doing the observing, right? Because the school nurse can't be observing and, you know, at the same time. So those are just the other considerations. It may be as we move past this that, you know, might it be that we drop that observation period? I don't really know. Maybe once they study it more and be like, oh, maybe it wasn't a big deal. Maybe we're being too cautious and they drop that. That could make it more easy. But right now, that's what we're doing. So I don't think anytime in the immediate future we're going to be doing it in schools. I think it's maybe logistically challenging, but never say never.
Okay, y'all. Dr. Ah, I depress us every week when we do this. So I'm going to go ahead and really depress us today. I have been keeping track of the numbers of COVID cases in children. And I started doing that. It's birth to age 17. I started July 1st and there were 5,026 cases then. So March, April, May, June, we had 5,026 cases. Today, and this is why we're really going to get depressed, we have 72,961 cases. Last week on Wednesday, when we did Facebook Live, the number was 67,955. So we've had 5,000 cases in the last week alone. And it took us until July 1st to get there with our first 5,000. And we're actually still, November 30th, we had 40,361. December 31st was 58,096. And we're already to 72,000. So in 2 months, we're probably going to have as many cases as we had up until November, which is that's just how bad we are right now. And as educators, that's really concerning to us, because when we see that number, it's just, we see children. We actually see children and not just the number. And I think that's one of the concerns that we have, that those numbers are being lost and they're just becoming numbers, and they're not being seen as our children who are sick. And that's one of the questions that I have, because this is so new. Are we beginning to see what might be long-term implications for people who have had COVID, or our children, or is that something that we're still so in it that we don't know yet?
Yeah, and I totally agree with you that we are getting numb to the numbers, because even like you've watched like CNN or some news channel, right, where they have that ticker on the side that's like this many cases, and when it started doing that, you're like, oh my God, and you're like watching the ticker every second. It's like, oh, it went up another 10, you know. And now it's like we've been hearing it for so long that people kind of just like get numb to it. I remember when we had our first 100,000 deaths in the US in the summer, and the front page of the New York Times was like all the names, and it was such a dramatic moment, and it had a little biography of every person. And just this past week, we passed 400,000, right? So that's 4 times the amount as when we had this dramatic headline. And then it was just like, you know, it was still on the front page, but it was like, you know, a normal size headline, like, oh. Yeah. And people do, I think you're right, stop thinking of it as like that was someone's dad, that was someone's child, you know, because it's been going on for so long that it's really, people, I get it, people want to get back to normal and they want to give their kids a normal life. So we kind of will it away from our consciousness. And I can't say for sure that, you know, now that schools have ramped back up and face-to-face has started for a lot of schools, that we aren't going to see another spike. And I can't say for sure that we're not going to shut down face-to-face again. And I can't say that I would blame them. You know, it's like we're all figuring this out. But in terms of long COVID, I think this is what you were asking about in terms of the long-term implications. We are learning after a year of going through this pandemic that lots of organs are affected by COVID, not just the lungs. Remember when we thought it was just like a lung thing? Now we know there's a lot of organs, and there's a lot of ways that this virus can affect people's health, not just in the immediate sense, but in the long term. And most people with COVID do recover and return to normal health. Some people can have symptoms that last for weeks, though, and sometimes even months, even after recovery from even a mild illness, right? And I know some of these people myself. I have a friend who is a MD PhD neurologist, and she had COVID in March, so like early on, and she still has a lot of brain fog, and she thinks it's actually very difficult to go back to work and take care of patients and do her job, even though her course was relatively mild. So here's some of the most commonly reported long-term symptoms after COVID for people who recover from the acute phase but don't quite get well all the way. Most common ones are fatigue, shortness of breath, that's probably a more obvious one, cough, joint pain, and chest pain, okay? Other somewhat less reported long-term symptoms include difficulty with thinking or concentrating. So this is like what my friend has. They call it like brain fog, COVID brain fog. Depression and mood disorders have been reported, and all these things we're really just starting to study now. So I wish I could give you more answers, but people are just like, what is this? And it's going to be years before we actually have understand why this happens or what we can do about it. Muscle pain, headache, fever that still goes on and off even weeks or months after the acute illness, and palpitations or like fast and pounding heartbeat. Some people have that. The most serious long-term complications from COVID include inflammation of the heart muscle. Some patients have had that, and I think there have been some studies in healthy athletes, so you know they had good hearts before, that even after a mild or asymptomatic case of COVID, that they have significant heart muscle damage. Lung function abnormalities, kidney injury, rashes and hair loss, and again, the psychiatric changes, anxiety, depression, changes in mood, inability to function really in society. So this is obviously very worrying, because I think sometimes when people talk about COVID, and we were just doing it too, we were talking about deaths and 100,000 deaths, 400,000 deaths. We have to remember that it's not just that you are healthy without COVID or you're dead, right? Like there's not just two choices here, that there's a whole middle ground of people who had COVID and they didn't die, but they didn't get all the way better. And there's a huge population of people that is growing who have these now long-term conditions, these pre-existing conditions, not to get into public health talk, that that we don't know when they're going to get better and how to treat them. So that's a cost too, even if people do survive.
Okay.
Now I've depressed you.
Well, I said I depress us every week. One of our members, or one of our people that's watching, she is a member, I recognize her name. Are we always going to have 2 doses, or in the future, are we going to have 1 dose and we're good?
I will tell you that one of the new vaccines that's set to come out, I think it's the Johnson & Johnson iteration of the COVID virus, the COVID vaccine, is a 1-dose vaccine. Right? That's how it was studied, and that's the efficacy that's reported is via 1 dose. Currently, the vaccines, the Pfizer and Moderna, are being delivered in 2 doses because that's how they're studied. Once we get everyone sort of set up and we get past this immediate acute phase, might we study like how efficacious is just 1 dose? And if it's like a high enough number, might we drop the second? It's possible, but we have to remember that a lot of vaccines are delivered in several doses, right? Like a booster shot, like we've all had those as kids. And you think even as, when you have a baby, you have to take them in for that DTaP and all that stuff. Those are there's 3 vaccines, the Hep B vaccine that your kids get when they're born, and then you take them back in, that's 3 doses, So it's actually very common for vaccines to, first you teach the body what the virus looks like, and then you remind it, and then it really remembers, right? It just needs that little reminder. So that's actually pretty common. So I wouldn't, it's not that aversive. I'm so glad to have the vaccine. Like I'm happy to come back in for a second dose, honestly, to make sure it works as well as possible.
Yes, definitely. And I want to do a short commercial real quick for our people watching tonight. We will be doing Facebook Live every Wednesday, of course, right back here at 6:30. But we want next week, we will not be here on Wednesday. Next Tuesday at 6:30, we will have Rights at Night. And we do those monthly. And next Tuesday, we will once again be talking about strategic waiver school systems and what that means for you, and what it means if your system is strategic waiver, and what it means if your system is a charter system. And I will put the link in the comments so everyone can register for the Rights at Night, again, Tuesday at 6:30. So, Joe, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do actually. I kind of like to know what motivates someone to run for elective office. Was there a specific event or a specific issue that you said, I'm going to jump in?
Yeah, here's the real answer to that question is that, well, I'm trying to figure out how real I want to get. In 2016, in November of 2016, you wake up the day after Election Day, and you come to realize that whatever you'd been doing in your life, and even though I really enjoy my job of being a doctor and taking care of patients, I find that very fulfilling. You kind of feel like maybe I'm not doing enough. Maybe I should be doing more and applying my skills in a broader way. So I thought, well, I'm a doctor. What's the best way to be useful? And I thought the best way to be useful was to help more with not just one patient at a time, like I do at the hospital, but to help with community health, right? So I was like, how do you do that? How do you, help the health of a community or a population at large? And you guys will love this because you're educators. I decided what I need to do was to go back and get my master's in public health, and then I would figure out how how to be better and how to be more useful. So I got my master's in public health. And when you get a public health degree, you realize that all the ways and all the reasons that the healthcare system doesn't work are addressable at the legislative level, right? Like you realize, like, oh, that's why all this stuff is broken. That's why our patients can't get to us. It's because, you know, these difficulties with access to care, difficulties with like inequities in education, social justice issues, that all these things feed into the health of a community, but you can't fix it at the bedside, right? So once you realize that you have to get involved in the legislature to make the changes that you want to see. So that's the short/long answer to that. Also, the state Senate seat that I, you know, in the district I live opened up. So I was like, hey, someone should run for that seat. Let's find that person. And you're like looking around and like, who would be good for this? Wouldn't it be great if they had a healthcare background? Because this is even before COVID, right? But even at the time, it was clear that healthcare was the top issue for most people in this district because, you know, people care about health insurance and costs of healthcare. And I was like, let's find that guy or lady. Then you realize it's you. So anyway, just a shout out to any students out there who are thinking, not for me, yes, for you. You could do it too, if I could do it.
One of our members has a question and she wants to know, do you know the effects of COVID on a child as the child is recovering or after the child recovers?
Yeah. I think children overall, and we've all heard this, tend to have a less severe course than adults. They tend to much less need the interventions that adults need. The fatality rate is thankfully much lower. And these are all things that we like to hear, right? Like I remember when COVID first came out and we started seeing it in our country, I kept thinking, thank God that it's less severe in kids. Because can you imagine, you know, as educators or as a parent, if it preferentially struck kids, sort of like the flu, right? And we forget that, but the flu preferentially strikes very young people and very old people, right? That said, there is a subset of kids who also have some of these long-term effects like we discussed, and they're not exactly the same. There are phenomena that we've seen, sort of syndromes in kids that have sort of like a chronic inflammation afterwards that can affect, again, all sorts of organ systems. So they can have, you know, persistent lung pain, lung issues, persistent pain, confusion, all these sorts of things that are very poorly understood. And they think it's related to inflammation that is, you know, that the body just gets so revved up in its response to the virus that even after the virus is gone, that it's still sort of, the body's sort of fighting itself, right? Again, a poorly understood syndrome, but it's very rare, thankfully, very, very rare. But, you know, that doesn't make anyone feel better because you know, it happens to some people and you don't want it to be your kid, right? So,
Right.
So we should be aware of that it's not harmless, even if your kid is young and even if your kid is healthy. Because that's who we see these syndromes in sometimes.
I'm going to do our second commercial. We usually have 3 or 4 commercials. Our second commercial this evening is for our GAE Day at the Capitol, and it is February 25th, and it will be virtual. We are not going to bring our normal 200 or 300 people to the Capitol, but Joe and I are going to work out a way that we will still be able to interact with legislators. Last year, we had lots of great speakers come speak to us, and we'll get it set up so they can come speak to us in our virtual format. So I am putting the registration link in the comments, and we encourage everyone to go ahead and register now and make your plans for GAE Day at the Capitol, February 25th.
I'm so sorry that it's been, that it's going to be kind of a bummer of a session, because I do remember when I was, you know, not a legislator, but it was so fun to go visit at the Capitol and see the chamber and see legislation being decided, and just being there was very thrilling, I thought.
Yeah.
So they've really cut down obviously on a lot of that this year, that they have cut out the page program, which is a bummer for a lot of our high school students, because I think kids who are age 12 to 18 usually get to work and deliver notes in the chamber. And that's, you know, that's a shame for them. And we don't get to have you guys visit us, but hopefully by next year, I would love to have any and all of you drop by.
Yes. And hopefully by next year, that's our hope. This time next year, we'll be back to doing all those things that we can do together. And Joe, real quick, can you give us I know we're sending out legislative updates and it's in our members' email, but everybody hadn't read their email. So give us our quick legislative update. What's going on this week?
So this week has been, hold on. This week has been, the General Assembly as a whole has been in recess. The appropriations committees for the Senate and House have had joint hearings. Superintendent Woods testified on Tuesday about his part of the state budget. And it is not a perfect budget. It is a little bit better than I was hoping for. For example, the governor did restore 60% of the $1 billion cuts that were made to education in this current year budget. Although it's not a part of the budget, it's worth mentioning that DOE and the governor have announced that they will be issuing a one-time $1,000 bonus to school teachers and school ESPs. That will be taken, yes, ma'am. I don't believe that to be a step toward the additional $2,000 that the governor has promised that would allow him to achieve a $5,000 pay raise for classroom teachers in his first term. But it is noteworthy as a sign that people do appreciate what teachers and our cafeteria workers and school bus drivers are doing. That will be taken up at a State Board of Education meeting in later in February. And I'm told that it should be being distributed in March. So we'll be watching out for that. There's money for expansion of broadband access in underserved and rural areas. We certainly saw in the summer and early fall how the lack of broadband access really handicapped families and students where there just is not that kind of access to stable and quality internet. We just found out this evening the new composition of the House committees. We do have a new chairman in retirement committee and a new chairman in the House Education Committee to match our new chairman in the Senate Retirement Committee and in the Senate Education Committee. We'll be sending out a memo on those new appointments soon. We do have a voucher bill this year that we're very concerned about. Yes, this is a bill offered by a state representative who is also chairman of a private school in Cherokee County that would allow students to receive taxpayer-funded private school vouchers or tuition subsidies if their school was not 100% offering in-person learning. Some questions about the timing of that. At what point in the past were they teaching in person and not? And of course, many private schools in Georgia also shut down for periods due to COVID. So this is, in my view, just another attempt to defund public education and take that money right out of the schools and put it right into private schools at exactly the wrong time. And the price tag on that voucher bill is about $450 million. That would plug the remainder of the $1 billion that was cut from education. So we got a lot of issues coming up. Michelle's committee, Senate Retirement, is meeting next Wednesday. I imagine that that will be more of an organizational type meeting, but it's getting busy and it's very difficult to navigate around the Capitol right now as a lobbyist or a guest. It's very cordoned off. Certainly this week with the inauguration, there was a lot of security around, and it's difficult to get a seat in most committee rooms. You really are watching it on a rather small monitor hanging out in the balcony area. Everyone that comes to the Capitol must wear a mask, and social distancing is in place. Different members have different ways of approaching it. Some want to visit with you by Zoom calls and phone calls. There are others that are willing with the proper PPE to meet in person. It varies on the member. But we've got a lot going on. The General Assembly will be back in starting Tuesday, the 27th.
Okay, so we are going to ask our members from that to sign up for Day at the Capitol because we know that will be virtual, and also to contact their legislator and make an appointment. So you can do that phone call or that Zoom call or in person, and you can work it out so that that is the best. Dr. Ott, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I think we've all learned a lot and gotten our questions answered. And we would like to thank everyone for joining us, and join us next Tuesday night for Rights at Night. Register in the link in the comments, and we will see you then. Everybody have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.